The night shift was always quietest after the last office lights flickered off. By then, most of the staff at Harrington and Company, a tall, glass-fronted corporate building in downtown Chicago, were long gone. Only a handful of cleaners remained, faces nobody remembered in daylight, yet who kept the place spotless for the next morning's hustle. Among them was Daniel Carter, a single dad in his late 30s. His navy blue janitor's uniform was frayed at the sleeves, his shoes worn, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that made him stand out. He wasn't just sweeping floors or emptying trash cans. He was holding his life together for his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Daniel's story wasn't one people knew. To the executives who passed by him each morning, he was just the janitor. They didn't see how, every night, after finishing his shift at 2 a.m., he'd take a bus back to the small apartment he and Lily shared. They didn't see how he'd wake her gently for school, pack her lunch with careful notes, and then crash for a few short hours before starting all over again. But there was one thing Daniel carried deep within him, something nobody in the building knew. He had once been a pianist. Not just any pianist, he had been on his way to Juilliard. Music had been his world until life had other plans. His wife's passing, bills piling up, and the need to provide for his daughter had silenced the piano keys in his life. At least, until one ordinary Tuesday night turned extraordinary. It happened in the main lobby, where a glossy black grand piano sat under a spotlight. It wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of luxury for clients, though hardly anyone ever touched it. For Daniel, every time he passed that piano, his chest tightened. It was like seeing an old friend from another life. That night, as Daniel mopped the marble floor, a group of young associates lingered after a late project. They were loud, laughing, riding the edge of exhaustion and arrogance that came from long hours. One of them, noticing the piano, smirked. "Hey," he said, nodding toward Daniel. "Bet you don't even know how to play a single note." Daniel looked up, surprised. "It's been a long time," he said softly, trying to brush it off. Another chimed in, egging the first on. "Come on, man, give us a show. Janitor by day, Beethoven by night." Their laughter echoed in the cavernous lobby. Daniel forced a polite smile, ready to decline. He didn't like being mocked. But then, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, maybe it was the weight of years, maybe it was Lily's face flashing in his mind, he set the mop aside. Without a word, he walked toward the piano. The associates chuckled, pulling out their phones, ready to capture the joke. What happened next silenced them. Daniel's fingers hovered for a moment, trembling, as if greeting an old friend. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed the first key. The sound was rich, haunting, and alive. He didn't play a simple tune or a nursery song like they expected. He played Chopin. The notes cascaded like water in a forgotten river, flowing with a depth that carried years of buried sorrow and unspoken love. The associates froze. Their smirks melted into stunned silence as the melody filled the lobby. One by one, others passing through the building stopped. A security guard paused mid-step, mesmerized. A secretary waiting for her Uber lowered her phone. Even the elevator doors opened and closed as people stood rooted to the ground. The sound carried upward, drifting into the higher floors where the late-night board meeting was still dragging on. Inside, Eleanor Harrington, the CEO herself, was trying to fight off fatigue when the music reached her. It was faint at first, but undeniable. Is that the piano?" one board member asked. Eleanor frowned. She knew none of her executives could play like that. With curiosity piqued, she excused herself and followed the sound down to the lobby. By then, Daniel was lost in the music. He played not for the associates, not for the crowd, not even for himself. He played for Lily. Every note carried the story of a father's sacrifice, of dreams deferred but not destroyed. His hands moved faster, effortlessly, weaving sorrow with hope, grief with resilience. The music shifted to something original, something raw and beautiful, born from years of silence. And when he finally struck the last chord, the lobby erupted into an odd hush. Nobody moved. Nobody clapped at first. They were too stunned. It was the CEO herself who broke the silence. Her eyes glistened as she stepped forward. "That was extraordinary," she said softly. Daniel stood quickly, embarrassed, ready to apologize for taking liberties. "I'm sorry, ma'am. They asked me to." But she raised her hand, stopping him. "Don't apologize. That was the most honest music I've heard in years." The young associates shifted uncomfortably, realizing their prank had turned into something profound. Eleanor studied Daniel. "What's your name?" "Daniel Carter, ma'am. I work the night shift." "And where did you learn to play like that?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at the floor. "I was training for Juilliard once. But life got in the way." The crowd murmured. Juilliard was no small name. Eleanor's gaze softened. She saw more than a janitor now. She saw a man carrying untold stories in his hands. In the weeks that followed, whispers about the janitor pianist spread through the building. Staff who once passed him by without a word now stopped to greet him. Some even asked him to play again, though Daniel was hesitant. Music had always been private for him. One evening, Eleanor approached him directly. "Daniel, I've been thinking," she began. "Next month, our company is hosting a charity gala. We usually hire a pianist, but I would be honored if you would play." Daniel froze. "Me? At a gala?" "Yes. For hundreds of people, including donors, partners, the press." His first instinct was to refuse. He was just a janitor, after all. But then he thought of Lily, who had never once seen him play. He thought of how her eyes lit up when she discovered the old, broken keyboard he'd salvaged for her birthday. Maybe it was time to let her see this part of him. So he agreed. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and gowns, a world far removed from Daniel's janitor's uniform. Yet when he sat at the polished Steinway grand piano, none of that mattered. The first piece he played was soft, welcoming. Then he shifted into something bolder, drawing every ear in the room. Guests who had been chatting over champagne gradually fell silent, turning toward the man at the keys. But the highlight came halfway through, when Daniel played something he had written himself, a piece dedicated to Lily. She sat in the front row, her eyes wide, her small hands clutching the edge of her seat. As the music swelled, tears streamed down Eleanor's face. She wasn't the only one. Many in the crowd dabbed at their eyes, moved in ways they hadn't expected. When the final note faded, the silence lasted only a moment before thunderous applause erupted. Daniel stood, overwhelmed, his gaze searching only for Lily. She jumped to her feet, clapping harder than anyone. That moment, for him, was worth more than anything. In the days that followed, Daniel's life began to change. Offers came in, not just from music halls, but from schools and programs looking for someone to inspire. Eleanor herself arranged for him to have flexible hours, so he could continue providing for Lily while exploring music again. But most importantly, Daniel had rediscovered something he thought he had lost forever. He was more than a janitor. He was more than the hardships he carried. He was a father, a musician, a man whose music could make even the hardest hearts soften. And it all started because someone made a joke. A joke that turned into a miracle.